Well, NCrunch is what I like to call a concurrent automated testing tool. It's also been called a continuous testing tool. Basically what it does is it allows you to run your automated tests in the background while you work. It works basically with snapshots of your solution while you're actually typing. So while you're typing in your solution, writing your code, NCrunch is running your test. So as you type, it can track the performance of individual lines of code and then show that in line. It has a lot of features around the ability to run things in parallel. So, if you've got a really long test suite that takes 2 hours to run, you can split that test suite up so that it will run across multiple processor cores on your machine, and it could run in a fraction of the time depending upon how many resources you have available on your computer. Basically, it's a kind of a high-end tool for what I like to think of as test-driven professionals. Basically, people that spend large parts of their day in code working with tests. NCrunch is targeted towards this sort of person to try and make their job as easy as possible. For me, it's not just about software development as a profession, but also as an interest. And I got into software development at a very young age. I was 9 years old when I wrote my first piece of code. I was on an old x86 system. I think it was a 88.6, and it had two 5¼ inch floppy drives. So that was in basic that I was working in, and that was enough to kind of get me interested and sort of see that there was a bit of a world there. So yeah, over the years as I kind of got older, I sort of progressed into more and more complicated languages. I had a bit of a run with Visual Basic when I was 11, and learnt Pascal when I was 14, and then moved into C++ sort of later in my teens. Eventually decided to do a degree and make a career out of it. It's probably one of the best decisions that I've ever made. From there I had an opportunity with a small software company on the North Shore here in Auckland to move into .NET. Was by developing a web kiosk to the system. And at the time, we were looking at a lot of the alternatives to to C#, coming from the Delphi realm. And the unfortunate thing was that a lot of the options there in adapting Delphi into .NET were just pretty unstable, and just sort of, we didn't really feel like we could count on them. So we decided, okay, we'll start building the new parts of the system in .NET. And that was really my introduction to .NET. I think it was back in 2003. And I've never looked back since. Yeah, of course, lots of war stories through all these contracts of projects with contracting schedules and unrealistic expectations, and people that wanted to write tests but never had time. And yeah, it's I guess the same sort of story you'll hear from many people that have been in the industry for a while. I guess I was one of the unlucky ones with TDD in the respect that I didn't really know anyone that did it. And I found out about it from a contractor who I was working with at the time. And he wasn't really doing it either. He just read lots of books and he was really excited about it. And it sort of came up from a lunchtime conversation, and I sort of found out, okay, there's a way that we can actually do things better. Why isn't anyone doing this? So I did my own research and I tried to learn what I could just on my own. This was when I was first actually getting wet with .NET. So around the same time I started with .NET back around 2003. And at this stage I don't know really what the whole testing scene was like worldwide. I think that probably it was just emerging. We kind of tend to live in our own little world down here, and there are occasionally connections outwards where you learn things that are going on. For me, I guess this was one of them. So yeah, I'd learned to pick it up basically in a very crude sense, doing very large integration tests, which I thought were unit tests at the time, over a rules engine and an underlying database. And I reflected on the project after it was finished, as to whether I felt that there was a better way that it could be done. And of course there are always ways that you can improve, but I tried to picture doing the project without automated tests. And I started to get very scared on on just how much the tests had actually done for us. So that kind of got me into it, and then for a couple of years afterwards I kind of floated in the nether, working in various companies that kind of had a remote interest in automated testing, but generally saw it as being an expensive waste of time, just used to keep developers happy. So yeah, there were sort of a couple of frustrating years for me, but I managed to get quite lucky in going to London and landing a job with the BBC, because this was sort of around the same time that the BBC was just doing a huge rollout of the Agile methodology. and there was they brought in coaches and they really put money behind it and they invested a lot. And it was remarkable to see just how the quality of all the systems there improved in the space of the year that I was there. And I learned so much from so many other people, people that had actually already been doing the testing for a while. Some which were more sort of at the extreme theoretical end, and then some which were very, very much more pragmatic and would sort of only use the tests where they thought that it would help them. So I've had a lot of luck, I guess, from that point on with being able to work with a lot of people from different backgrounds and with different perspectives on test-driven development, and all using different approaches. And over the last few years, I've really tried to kind of take the best of those to form my own approach, one that I felt works well for me. May not work well for everyone, but it seems to fit with my own mental framework. Was actually during a very interesting time, was sort of just after the global financial crisis really hit, and being in London in 2009 was a bit rough. Lots of people coming out of the banks, and a lot of work around. So it wasn't easy to sort of pick and choose contracts that were available. So I took on a short-term contract with a local startup that was in a really unstable state at the time, and they didn't really have a lot of big budgets for their own hardware. So I ended up having to work on an existing system using a computer that must have been, I don't know, at least 5 years old and far more than that out of date. It was really slow, and I was trying to do something that was not very complicated but involved a lot of different use cases. I think it was trying to develop a particularly large MPC controller or something like that. And the test cycles that I was having to go through were just tremendously long. I was having to wait about 2 minutes from the time when I'd actually finished writing the code through until I could actually get the test result for the code. Thinking, that's just so horrifically slow, and it was so painful. I must have taken about 5 times as long to finish the task as I would have if I had proper tooling or proper hardware, to actually run the tests. So I thought about that and I reflected on it. I thought, well, there must be a better way to do this. Maybe there's a way that we can reduce the amount of work that's involved, a way that we can get the machine to take over more of this process, so that we can do it smarter. So that was kind of where the initial idea came from. And after I'd finished the contract, I made the decision to sit down and see what I could come up with. So I basically set myself 2 weeks to try and build a prototype of something that could take some of the pain away. And to be honest, it didn't take the pain away at all, because it ended up doing far more work than I was originally doing myself manually, and it only slowed the machine down more. But what was quite interesting was while working on this prototype, I realized there was so much more that I could actually do with automated tests than just run them. I was able to pull code coverage information out and embed it right in the IDE and the very lines of code that I was working in. So once I sort of realized that there was a lot more that the machine could do, that we'd been trying to handle manually, I started to really think about, what could be done to try and get us closer to our code, closer to our tests, and try and learn more about what our tests could tell us. So I guess, the initial pain point that I kind of hit with automated testing was something that many people probably would feel, but it kind of led me down a little bit of a different road into an evolving concept that is over the last 3 years sort of slowly come out into something that I think is actually much more useful than something that can just run tests faster. Of course, NCrunch does run tests faster, but I think that's not the main feature that a lot of people associate with it. The more people pick up the tool, the more you learn about the tool, the more you want it to do, and the more problems you need to solve. So yeah, the investment in it has been sort of fairly steadily increasing over the space of time that it's been alive. With developing a tool like NCrunch is that everything is so uncertain. You don't really know exactly how many people would be prepared to pay for a tool like this. You don't know how much they'd be prepared to offer. You don't know how many people are even writing automated tests in the first place. So it gets quite hard to actually create any sound judgments about whether there's even a viable commercial model that exists. So before the tool hit the beta state, I really didn't have any information at all about how big the market would be or how many people would be interested in the tool. Well, it wasn't until probably around January, February this year that NCrunch actually really started to attract a decent user base. So up until that point, it was really all just kind of guesswork. I sort of hoped that I had something that people would be interested in, but I really didn't know. It wasn't until the the major feature version came out with the debugging and everything, version 1.37, that a lot of people started taking notice of NCrunch, and it really spread a lot further. So I guess it was sort of around that point that I started to seriously think about whether it would be worth commercializing the product, because up until then, I could see there just wasn't going to be enough money in it anyway. Once you have those sorts of questions answered, you can then start to make far more informed decisions, around the commercial model. Is it something that you should price high? Is it something that should be priced low? Who would be prepared to pay? How many would I actually need to sell? To make sure I could continue working on it. Should I have a free version there that people can use? Is it something that I could actually support with the money that could come in? All these sorts of questions, they start to become, the answers become a lot clearer when you know more about the market that you're working in. Originally, I looked at the idea of a freemium model, basically one that could allow NCrunch to have a wider user base, and still have sort of a percentage of that user base that could then pay to sustain the rest. But what I found out was that most people that are using NCrunch actually just use it between the hours of sort of about 9 to 5. Basically these are software professionals that are using NCrunch to help them be better at what they do. And when you start sort of looking at a market like that, you then realize that this is actually where all the value is, and it seems to be where just about everyone is using it. Obviously, with a freemium model, I could pick up a lot more people using the product on weekends, after hours, open source developers, people that are important to the industry and that I would want to support. And the problem with NCrunch, again, with it being such a complicated tool, is it is also a very expensive tool to support. And if you go and have a look in the support forum, you'll see what I mean. There's no shortage of build and test issues coming up from crazy frameworks and everything. There's now more than 2,500 posts in that forum. Nearly half of those are me, basically, trying to support people who are doing interesting things with NCrunch and trying to make sure that the tool can support all the crazy edge cases that might happen in the real world. So the more users obviously use NCrunch, the more of these cases there will be. And although version 1 is in a very stable state now, where there's far fewer support requests coming in, many of the things that NCrunch is integrated with are moving targets. We've got 5 automated testing frameworks, 3 versions of Visual Studio, countless mocking framework testing tools, and they all need to be able to work properly without problems. And when they fail, they need to fail predictably so people can understand what's happening. And the more people that you have using the product, the more of these things you need to support. And the harder it is to actually get a real signal-to-noise ratio about which tools are important and which ones aren't. Because there are some very, very important differences between how, say, open source developers use their tools and how people use their tools 9 to 5. Open source developers are motivated very differently to professional developers. They're in it for the love of it. They want to build something cool. They want to build something great. They want to contribute. And many of their motives are built around, trying different tool sets, trying, different approaches to solving problems. And, in a lot of ways, that's where much of the real innovation comes from in the industry, because in your 9 to 5 job, you've got to be really careful about what risks you take. A real problem that I have had is trying to sort of separate, situations where you've got someone who basically needs to have a particular feature in order to cut their development costs down by 25%, on a project that could be worth millions. And then on the other extreme, you've sort of got someone who basically has a feature that, would put a smile on their face every couple of weeks. And it can be really hard to tell actually where the value is between those two. So, having those different segments in the market increases the amount of support effort needed and makes it much, much harder to actually manage the product and manage the features that need to go into the product. So, with consideration to a lot of that, I decided eventually what needed to happen with NCrunch would be that it would need to be targeted towards the professional software developer, to someone that does TDD for a living, that needs to be paid for it, that needs a tool they can rely on and deliver features in a place where they know that there's value. So, I think it's kind of a realization that, for many years we've been using automated testing tools that are from open source communities and from places, where a lot of the innovation's really been taking place. But there hasn't really been much that's actually targeted just the test-driven developer working in a professional capacity to be as productive and as efficient as they can. So that's something where I see NCrunch really falling into a bit of a niche, and that's where I see the future for the tool. So far, it's been pretty much in line with what I expected. I haven't been horribly disappointed. I haven't been jumping up and down doing backflips. Yeah, it looks like version 2 will be happening, which to me is the big one. I've been very lucky so far that I've had a supportive wife, who's been patient with me while I've been working on this crazy project on my own for so long, and putting up with it all. So yeah, I have optimistic expectations, on where it will go. At the moment, it's still very early on. I think it was only about 3 weeks now that since the first commercial version went up there. So yeah, it has been very interesting reading a lot of the responses. They've come from all different ends of the spectrum. Had a few bits of hate mail, a few people, not very happy about the whole idea, and the other side, I've also had a lot of people that have been very supportive and really wanting to see the project mature into something much more amazing than it already is. And to me, that's where the real gold is in the project. These are the people that I want to work with. They're the people that I want to see be the best at what they do, and this is what NCrunch is all about. From here on now, I guess now that we actually have a stable tool that we can use day to day, I'm starting to look a bit further forward, more towards the next major release of NCrunch and what will be going into there. And I have the benefits now of actually having the time and the space that I can set aside to actually think about the bigger features and the real direction for the product. So I think that from here on out, the releases, at least for version 1, the releases will be sort of small increments, basically on the stable platform that exists, and then the bigger things will be coming later in the major increments, which will be annual. There are going to be, a few improvements around some of the compatibility. There's a page up on the website that basically already sort of forecasts what will be supported in version 2. So we've got proper built-in support for Silverlight-based testing frameworks, the new Metro Modern WinRT, whatever you call it, that has come with Windows 8. You've got support for Microsoft Fakes and a few other things as well, which I can't remember because I'm not looking at the page. But those are the sorts of things that I can comfortably commit to, because I know that the tool needs to support those things, because there are people that are hanging on waiting for them to come in. I know that they're possible, and they basically just require a level of effort to get there. As far as the really juicy stuff is concerned, I guess there's some fairly obvious ones that a lot of people will expect anyway. I want to make the tool a hell of a lot faster. At the moment, it's really quick. It's a lot quicker than a standard manual test run, but I think I can make it quicker. And there are a lot of different ways that I can go about doing this. Some of them are pretty risky. Some of them are very uncertain. Some of them are more predictable, but I think you can expect that version 2 will be able to run tests a lot faster than version 1. The features that NCrunch has around its metrics, the performance and code coverage information, that's a whole new area that can be explored, and I want to try and find other ways of presenting those metrics. Trying to make it more interactive and more customizable. And there's also a lot of stuff that's been requested very heavily around the engine modes, trying to make them more configurable and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff there that's been lined up. Some very big and very significant features which I really want to put into version 2. And I can't definitively say which of them will make it in, because, yeah, of course the highest value ones are also the riskiest ones. But I think that as a version it'll be well worth the wait, and I think a lot of people will really enjoy it.